Michelle Cole, you're the costume designer for Blackish, which wrapped up its 8-season run this spring. But the season didn't just end with a bang. It also started with a bang. So what was it like designing for guest star Michelle Obama right out of the gate in the season premiere
Oh
episode?
my God, it was so amazing. Um, we knew, no one knew. We all knew about 2 months before that she arrived. So there was a lot of discussion with her press secretary and all the people. There was a lot of Zoom calls. So it was really very exciting, but it was hard to hold it in. And so that was the hard part. But she was lovely. She was fantastic. And her style
You know,
was too. Hmm.
and I'm assuming she would she contributed a lot of ideas and to her looks.
Yeah, it was. I mean, she was really. She had two changes, and we worked with her stylist, and we told her the colors and things that we had. She knew the script. She knew what the scenes were. So we all collaborated and did a fantastic job. And she's good friends with Tracy Ellis Ross. So so it was like home between them. So it was a wonderful day, wonderful time, and it was a great experience.
And yeah, another thing that strikes me about that episode and about the series in general is, you have all the other members of the family trying to really step it up to impress Michelle Obama,
Hmm.
but it's also, it highlights how much color and vibrancy and, just energy there is in the wardrobe in general. Is that something that's really important to you to have that kind of visual vibrancy when you see these characters?
It is. I think when we did the pilot, I think we established that in the very beginning of the show with Kenya Barris, ABC, and all the executives is that we wanted color, and I did in living color, so it wasn't too much far and farther from in living color too, but it was a lot of color. I love doing it. I love texture, and I just think that this family I think that's what they represented as a black upper class family, was that we do enjoy color as a culture as well. So I think that they look best in it. I think everybody's skin is a comedy with some serious matters that we discuss, but I think it plays well on this show for the last 8 years.
And working on a show with young actors, watching them grow up on the show,
Hmm.
they have their own styles that evolve over time. What would you say, those actors brought into, kind of themselves into the wardrobe process?
It was great. I mean, I have such a great relationship and personal relationship with the young actors on Blackish. And the one thing is they started when they were like 8 and 9 years old and 13 years old. So when they got 16 and 17, I loved listening to them because they had so much to say, and they brought me like sneakers and what was happening. So I had to really keep up. And so especially with Miles and Marcus, them being the young male actors, they brought a lot to the table, and they would make their list before I would start the season each year. They would make their list of what sneakers they wanted, and and so and their colors, and each year it changed because each year they were getting older. So that was the really fun part, is watching them to develop into these young adults. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, speaking of sneakers, there's that one episode during the season that highlights Dre's sneaker collection, and his coworker Griffin, who has his own even better sneaker collection. Is that a wardrobe department thing, or more of a
No, that's a prop. That was
prop department?
yeah. And we're very happy. I mean, we collaborate about that. We have a great prop department, and so, but we did. Everybody pitched in to get all those shoes. So, and when Kenya Barris did the pilot, he had a contact with the shoe department, so we were able to maintain that, because Dre loves sneakers, so that's his thing, and the family loves sneakers. So, but that was a prop master.
And another character on the show who is very distinctive in terms of his style and his personality is Charlie.
Mhm.
What has it been like? Because his looks are even more flamboyant sometimes than other characters. What was it like designing for him and getting to be a little bit bolder?
Oh, Dion Cole is just pretty amazing. It's so much fun to do him in different colors as well. We kind of made him like a Chicago kind of guy, kind of different with his shirts and his vest and his jeans, suede shoes, and so he just has this. He's amazing, and he's an amazing actor. And we kind of wanted. He has a loud personality. He has a little bit of a loud personality and kind of odd. So we kind of wanted to make sure like his clothes were kind of nice, but still there was the colors and the patterns and the hanky. I mean, who wears that? Who wears a hanky in their a pocket square still in 2000 in 2021, 2022? So it's just he's a little bit dated, and that's what we tried. We bought a lot of his clothes. Most of his costumes are from downtown LA. So we shop in the men's stores down there to get that kind of older men vibe. Because we wanted to make a difference between him and Dre, where Dre's very, he's Givenchy, Dior, and all of those type of things. And then we made Dion a little bit old school.
And that character gets married to Vivica Fox in one episode. Of course, a wedding episode gives you a chance from a costume department to dress everyone to the nines. Was that one of the more one of the busier episodes for your department?
It was, and it was again. We had so much fun with her, and she brought so much to the table, and the colors again with the pink suit and everything that she wore. And one of my favorite parts was when they did their dancing scene. That was a lot of fun working with the dancers, giving them bright colors in their suits and things like that. So, but yeah, that was a lot of fun to do, and she's delightful to work with.
And another episode, of course, where you could like really dress it up is the one where Dre's up for an advertising award. The one thing that stood out to me especially was Tracy's that yellow dress that she wears during that ceremony. It's Tracy Ellis Ross is such a fashionable person, and that really was striking. How much input did what was
dress,
the collaboration?
The yellow dress that had all the different appliques to it. That's the one you're talking about, right? Oh, that was amazing on her. She looked great. Her hair looked great. We have such a great hair and makeup department, and so when you do something like that, you're definitely doing head to toe to make her to look that fantastic. I mean, she does the dance scene when they both do the dance scene in the hallway, and she pulls up her dress. It's such a classic Tracy Ellis Ross mode to do. That's what she does, and she has fun with her characters. And we kind of debated about that dress when we were looking at it, and then I said, let's try it, let's go for it. And everybody loved that dress on her, and that was a great one of my highlights for a season was that dress and the red that she wore during Michelle Obama.
And the series ended with this really joyous kind of jazz funeral. What was that like to design? Because you have a lot of the characters in black, but also still bringing their own personalities to it. What was that like?
It was, that the last show, it was emotional. First of all, it was just an emotional show for all of us. So I think doing that scene and wearing black was still a little bit, it was hard. I had been there for 7 years, the first from the pilot, and then I did 7 seasons with them. And doing it and wearing black, I mean, it even makes me tear up a little bit now because it was such an emotional show for us. And sorry, but it was a great show. They wanted to wear black, but I think at the end we made it really. We have a new chapter, so I think that was really great about the show is that we got to see them wear black and have this in New Orleans kind of the band and walking in the streets and things doing that, and yeah, I think the black added the whole setting to our show. But I think the good news is that everybody's going to be okay.
You could tell how much the show meant to you, from the way you talk about it. And congratulations on 8 seasons of it. And it's been a pleasure talking to you about it.
Thank you, Daniel.
Janie Bryant, you're the costume designer for 1883, a prequel to Yellowstone that tells the story of the Dutton family ancestors during the 19th century. You actually previously won an Emmy for another Western, Deadwood, and it was actually set pretty close to the same time period as this series. How are the needs of this show similar and different from Deadwood?
Well, 1883, and thank you so much for having me here. Let me just start by saying that this is exciting to talk about costume design. So I'm so happy to be here. 1883 is kind of in the same period. Deadwood was set in 1876. Very different set of circumstances in terms of the script. And 1883 is a little bit later, and the journey with these characters is very different. Kind of what is the same is I'm glad that I had the experience of so much distressing with Deadwood, because it really did help in terms of understanding how distressing works with 1883. So I was happy to have that experience. But just in terms of designing 1883, it was really interesting. I learned so much about so many different cultures, because the immigrants were a big part of the story of 1883 and their journey. And their costumes were really on that journey with each person too. And we really see that in terms of the costume design with all the characters, including the Dutton family. Elsa, her character has a whole journey with her traveling dress going into a whole different life of its own. So when I was designing that costume, I was thinking about, okay, how can this costume make all of these different transformations? And so I love the idea of her having a two-piece garment, which was, very indicative of the 1880s. And also the style of her garment really was important to be able to morph and transform into different aspects of what the script was calling for. And also I loved the idea of designing a skirt for her that she was going to be able to ride horses into. Because let's just say Elsa does not, ride side saddle. She, straddles the horse. So she had to have a skirt in which could really accommodate those needs. So, a lot of the costume design was about so much of what the action was going to be for all the different characters.
Yeah, and speaking of action, when you're telling the story like this that has a lot of action and activity, and the characters traveling, do you need a lot of duplicates? Is there what are the complexities? Do you need to have the clothes accommodate for comfortable stunt work, and what are those considerations?
Yeah, so we had multiples on every single principal cast and day player for gunshots, for fighting. We have to have lots of multiples just for, like Elsa's costume, perfect example. I think we made probably 9 of those costumes. Her blue dress, her blue traveling dress. And then even like her white dress, the one that she gets shot with an arrow, we had 6 of those costumes to accommodate for the arrow and the special effects and the stunts. And then I also made, I had my team make a lot of the underdress for the pantaloons. I made them so they were actually pants, and just added the ruffle trim on the bottom so they could ride the horses, which was very effective. And then also the ladies and my male actors too, we bought them a lot of equestrian pants with the padding in them so that they would be more comfortable in riding horses all day. Because it wasn't like, oh, we have a quick scene just on a horse. I mean, once they got dressed in their costume, they were out for the whole entire day on that horse in, those period correct saddles, which are really uncomfortable. So we had to make all sorts of accommodations for just their daily work and being able to work and ride on the horses too, and not only accommodate for the action of fighting, stunt doubles. We had a huge team of stuntmen, stunt women, that all had to be doubled as well. And we had the whole group of actors and background actors that were on the wagon trail, and they all had to be multiplied as well. Well, I guess my average was about 8 costumes for each actor in terms of multiples, not accounting for if they had changes to their costume. So it was a huge endeavor for sure.
And not just dealing with the period accuracy and the action that takes place. You're also trying to convey character with the wardrobe. What was it like working with Taylor Sheridan, the creator, and just each of the actors to kind of build these characters and who they were and showcase that to the audience through the wardrobe?
Well, Taylor, it was great working with Taylor. I really appreciate that he has a strong sense of color, and he has a very strong sense of character as well. I mean, I would always tell him, Taylor, you would make a great costume designer because he really would. He has a great vision. So, like when I would talk to him in the beginning about Elsa, he had this idea of like, oh, I just really see Elsa in light blue because light blue is so optimistic and it's hopeful. And so he really loved the color of Elsa being in blue and also yellow. Like those were her two colors for her character. And so I had sent him this swatch of fabric that ultimately became the traveling dress. And it was a swatch of fabric that I found that was light blue and navy blue. It had like a few different tones of blue in the fabric, and he loved it. And I actually ended up using the back side of that fabric as well, just because it was like more textural, and I loved the back side of the fabric better than the front side. So he really responded to that colorway for Elsa. So that was really, a great collaboration. And also, because her hair was blonde, so he loved the idea that like the blues and the yellows were just Elsa's character. I mean, for me, like I always thought of the light blue as like airy and just very optimistic. Like Elsa had like this very optimistic adventurous spirit, so like all the different tones of blues really went into illustrating her character visually. um and then that's why I also designed the leggings for her in the yellow, which was indicative of the Native Americans and the Comanche tribe at that time period too. And of course, I loved working with Faith. She's such a firecracker. I would actually always call her firecracker, and she always called me Tabasco. So we had a great working relationship and just a lot of fun together. Um, and I love designing her traveling costume as well because she really is that feminine force and maternal force within the family. And I love the idea of designing her initial costume in like this very muted rose and pink um, colors for that feminine strength and her maternal protective nature that she had for the entire family. And then like as the trip moved forward and the further they got away from home, her color palette became darker and darker and darker. Um, and Taylor actually loved that idea of her becoming darker. So I think that, you know, visually you can really see Margaret's story as well. And for James Dutton, who is played by Tim McGraw, Tim is uh, great as well. I mean, there's so, I mean, I'm Southern and there were so many Southerners on that show, and it was really fun. It felt like home, and I loved all the actors. And Tim, he and I had a lot of conversations about his hat because, you know, in a Western, the hat makes the man. I mean, I had a lot of conversations with Sam Elliott too. Um, and I love that, you know, hats really portray the character in a Western, because that's, you know, really what you see. And it describes so much about one's character. So for Tim, you know, we talked a lot about, since he was a farmer, since he came from Tennessee, he wasn't a cowboy. You know, he had like, I love the idea of him being visually a little bit more of an outsider in his design. So he does not have the, you know, he doesn't really have like the fringe chaps or like a huge brimmed hat like a cowboy would during that period. You know, his hat is a little more lower profile. It's more of like a slouch style hat, of which is very indicative of the 1880s, and it has more of an Eastern look and not a Western cowboy look. And also I loved his palette, like just being very super masculine with like these very dark browns, like really dark browns, burgundies, tans. I love the idea of his color palette being very earthy, very grounded. So we really see his color palette in those colors like throughout the series.
And it really comes through in the design and throughout the whole series. And thank you so much for talking with us about it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Kameron Lennox, you designed the costumes for Pam and Tommy, about Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee, of course, and the sex tape that was stolen from them and released. Now, of course, Pam and Tommy were prominent public figures. So how much of their media and public appearances did you have to go through for research? Like, what was that process?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, because the thing for me going into this project was that we were recreating real people that are real in this world and that are still around today. And but during that time, they were very much in front of the camera. They're very their public life, or their private life, was pretty public, but it was only when they were in the public. So there was a lot of research that we had to do to try to recreate their private life. So that did entail watching a lot of interviews with them, reading their books. I watched Baywatch, I watched Barbed Wire, I watched a lot of the MTV interviews with Tommy Lee. And then I also just scoured the internet for photos of them. Our timeline on our show is within the years of late 94 to maybe late 97, I have to say. So that was a very small amount of time in their relationship that we tried to hit. And so for my research, I tried to recreate the timeline of their lives before they met, when they were together, and then after our show takes place, just so that while I was recreating their wardrobe and their life, I was taking tidbits from where they were prior to meeting and then where they were heading and ending up, because their relationship did kind of shift and change as they went. And there is some costume choices they made later that I think people were hoping to see, but they weren't part of this very small slice of life that we were trying to recreate. And I'm talking about like the big fuzzy hats and stuff like that. We weren't quite there yet. So I wanted to kind of show this trajectory of where they were heading.
And are you using with the period series like this? Are you making a lot of stuff custom? Are you looking through vintage? What was the process of finding pieces?
Yeah, I tend to be a bit of a purist when I'm doing period work, and I think that is for me it's a challenge, but it's also the most fun, trying to find these things and sourcing them. There were a lot of things that we recreated and built. I have an incredible crew on my team that were able to recreate the Baywatch bathing suit, which for me was that one is probably the one I lost the most sleep over, because it is the most iconic piece that she wears. And we were dealing with, some prosthetics that we had to build on. And we were also dealing with a lot of movement running on the beach and all of that. So that we did recreate and spent a lot of time focusing on and tweaking and making sure it was perfect. We recreated all of the G-strings for Tommy Lee. The suit that he wears to the barbed wire premiere, which is this red kind of zoot suit, that one was just imagined. It was just taken from some reference photos throughout the years, and we just reimagined that and built it for him. But as far as everything else, I did contact a lot of local vintage dealers to find certain pieces. She does wear some iconic 90s Versace, Dolce & Gabbana. There's a couple vintage Vivienne Westwood dresses in there. And then for Tommy Lee, we recreated all of his hardware jewelry to match the ones that were custom made for him at the time, because that wasn't something that you could just source. We recreated the belt that he wore, because I believe that was custom made for him as well. So yeah, there was a lot of things that we definitely had made for them.
And apart from them, the story also involves a lot of characters who are not, as recognizable figures as Pamela and Tommy Lee, like Rand, who's the one who steals the tape. What was the process of designing for those characters? Was there more freedom, since obviously there weren't as many kind of references directly to them?
Yeah, there's definitely more freedom with Rand and with Uncle Milty. They were both from the same kind of stock of people. So we did a lot of research on watching as much as we could of the inland valley porn society and the ones that they were part of. The research that we could find was actually in the videotape, so we would just kind of skim through them to see what they look like, but we didn't really know what they were like in real life. There wasn't any personal photos of them, and Uncle Milty, the real Uncle Milty, has passed away, so there wasn't any chance of actually contacting him. The funny thing with Nick Offerman, which I find that this is a true test to him as an actor, was we did have a fitting with him where I kind of went a little crazy with his character, because we didn't really know who he was and we were trying to figure out who this character was. And we put him in a lot of pastel colors, a lot of 70s, really tight matching outfits, a lot of neckerchiefs, maybe a little captain's hat. We went a little crazy with him, and he just played it. He played it the whole fitting. And then after a few meetings with producers and showrunners, we decided that we were going to tailor it down, take it down. Like, we had enough peacocks in our show that we didn't need to have another one. And so then we recreated him to be a little more subtle, kind of the workhorse type that just woke up to get dressed to go to work. I did pull a lot of images of Max Baer Jr., who was an actor once in the Beverly Hillbillies, but then he later became a Valley porn producer, and he wore a lot of fanny packs and track pants and stuff like that. So we did incorporate a little bit of that into his character. With Seth, that was probably the easiest fitting I've ever had, because we really didn't have any personal photos of Rand to use, but we also wanted it just to feel like this guy's just middle class, doesn't really think about what he's wearing, but also brought in a lot of the kind of the 90s style that was happening at that time, and that, you know, the normcore, as they would call it, or the Jerry Seinfeld with the white puffy sneakers and the light wash jeans, or the jean shorts, which Seth had a lot of fun with. But yeah, we also wanted to kind of touch on his background a little bit, because he grew up in Hollywood. His dad was a Hollywood star, very handsome man, always put together. And so we had this idea that Rand would always tuck in his shirt, because he was probably, as a boy, always told to tuck in his shirt by his leading, you know, his Hollywood dad. But yeah, both of them, and you know, when they came in, they were just so open to trying things, and it I feel like it really reads well with those two together. That shows they're from the same world.
And you mentioned the prosthetic work. Was that unique to have to dress actors around like a set of prosthetics that were designed to make these actors look like their characters?
Yeah, that was the hugest challenge, I think, on the show. I was lucky enough to be working with Barry, who was our hair, our hair department head, and David, who was makeup, and then Jason, who was prosthetics. The four of us worked very closely together, because it was something that we had to engineer anytime we had a scene coming up, especially with Lily. Being the hair, one thing is if her hair was down, did she need to be in the prosthetic chest plate, or could we cheat it with her own body and rig it in a certain way? If her, and hide it behind the wig, or if her hair was up, then that was a day that we knew that we had to put her in the chest plate. We were always trying to figure out scheduling and time where we can engineer things so that Lily didn't have to sit in the chair as long as she did every day, because it was a very long process for her before crew call, and then we had long shooting days. But a lot of the time she was actually in the prosthetic. So we had to really figure out what part of the prosthetic, every time she was coming in to do a scene, what was going to be shown. And that was pretty challenging. A lot of times we had to recreate or think about if they needed to make a new type of chest plate, if there was something that we were going to show the side boob, which was a big thing that Pamela Anderson did, and if the garment that she was wearing in that scene, did we have to recreate something for the side? And then we do have 2 episodes where she's pregnant, so we also had a pregnancy belly on top of the chest plate to consider. A lot of the clothing that she wears in those episodes, like the latex dress, we had custom made from the company that made our latex dresses to be cut and molded over her prosthetic belly. That was a kind of a huge thing to go through all the different sizes and shapes that we were going to do, measure them, and make sure that we were able to recreate that, because that's something, latex, you can't sew. It has to be cut and glued into the exact proportion. And then sometimes we were able to use her own body and rig her with bras that we made that were, padded and engineered and created in a way to make it seem like she was still in her prosthetic. And then for Sebastian, we did have quite a few fittings with different types of prosthetics that they were using, because it wasn't just one that they were trying out. We did a lot of camera tests to see which one would look the best on camera underneath garments. And I think that the one that they ended up going with was bigger than we had measured for. And so our first day of shooting, we did have an emergency on set where we had to do an emergency cut and sew to recreate the garments for him to wear. But yeah, I think for me, this show really challenged me in the way to really think outside of the box and think outside of garments and how you can really make them work on something that isn't the normal go-to. And also, I feel like it taught me a lot about working collaboratively with other departments. I think this is the first time where I was on a constant call or text or email with hair, makeup, and prosthetics.
Well, congratulations on your work on the series, and thank you so much for talking with me about it.
Thank you, Daniel.
Hala Bahmet, you're the costume designer for This Is Us, which aired its 6th and final season this spring. The last season included a second wedding for Kate, who married Philip, after having previously married Toby. Was that the heaviest lift of for the costume department this season?
No, I mean it was the show. I love making the wedding dresses. Those are my favorite. I love making gowns. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I love making gowns for Chrissy. And I have made 2 of them for her, and it was challenging because each one had to be different because they're 2 different weddings, 2 different times in her life. And I wanted to have different necklines and different beading and lace effects and all like that. But overall, the most challenging thing about our show is that we jump around in time so much. We never know what decade we're going to be in until we get the script just, a few days before we shoot it. So, and we also work with a lot of prosthetics, prosthetic body prosthetics, and prosthetic makeup. Our makeup department's incredible. But and we also work with a ton of children. This year we had 4 different actors, 4 different principal actors playing our 3 main children. We had 3-year-olds, we had 3 to 5-year-olds playing the kids when they were younger, 9 to 12-year-olds playing them when they were in tweens, 15 to 21-year-olds playing them as teens and college kids, and then the adult actors, Chrissy Metz and Justin Hartley and Sterling K. Brown. So we would never know who. And then we also had lots of babies, extras, tons and tons of babies that we would see them when they're 3 months old, and we would see them when they're 5 months old. And at one point we had 8, and then we did this again with the children of Kate and Toby. At one point we had 8 baby Jack. We needed multiples of 8 for their son, baby Jack. We had 3 sets of twins and 2 different dolls. One that could be animatronic and one that just was stationary. It was just, so it appears on the surface to be just a nice, touching, emotional family drama is actually really complicated behind the scenes. I mean, I've even had costume friends say, "Oh, what a lovely show. It's probably not that difficult costume-wise." And I just think, there's so many, it moves at such a fast pace too, as we all know, all of us in costumes, we all know the pace of it. So anyway, that's for me the most challenging thing is getting a new script and suddenly having to figure out how we're going to make it all happen. And it might involve custom made bridesmaids dresses or wedding dresses, or it might involve, stunts and car accidents, or it might be 1914, or it might be 1954, or it might be 1954, 1964, and 1984 all in one episode, like that. So, but that's what I like about it too, is because it's always something different. It's always I don't know if I would be happy with a project where I was just doing the same thing over and over again. I think I would probably get bored with that. So I'm not sure I want to do another show where we span 100 years of time every week, but I do want to, I have really enjoyed it, and it's been a really big part of my life for 6.5 years. I did the pilot and I've been with the show, and we're just, last night we aired our penultimate episode, and next Tuesday is our final episode. And it's very emotional. The storytelling how Dan Fogelman, our show creator, has wound up the stories of all these different people in the family, how he's woven them all together, and now we're having this kind of closure. It's really beautifully written, and it is really emotional for me. And like what Michelle said, similar to Michelle, I feel very emotional because I've devoted so much of my life to it. Okay, now I'm gonna cry. And the stories are so emotional and they're so real, you know. That's, for me, that's part of why I'm so connected to the characters, because for me, they're like, after all this time, they're like real people to me. You know, when I think about what they're going to wear and how to dress them, and the costumes that I'm making and designing and building and buying and renting and finding all over the world, for me, they're real people. So that's sort of my through line, and it kind of keeps me, I feel like I've gotten to know them so well that they are my friends, and now we have to let them go, and now I have to let them go. So it's quite emotional.
And you know, as you mentioned, you're dealing with these characters through different time periods. When the show started, it was past and present. What was your thought process when you first learned, okay, now we're going to the future as well, and the different challenges that would entail?
Oh yes, well, as you said, when we did the pilot, none of us knew that the show was going to jump around in time so much. We thought we were going to be in just the 2 time periods, as you said, and just have this nice family drama and tell these beautiful stories. And then we discovered that, yes, we're going to be all over the place, including into the future. My process for looking to the future, and when we do future, I'm not talking about sci-fi or anything really unusual. You know, we go to 2025, 2030, 2035, you know, going 10, 15, and maybe even 20. I don't think we haven't gone beyond 20 years in the future. But while tracking some family members as they grow up or become adults and have children of their own and like that. That's why we go into the future. So it's not sci-fi. It's not, you know, spaceships and, you know, special costumes and anything like that. But it is really challenging for me, for my team, for us to figure out, so what would we be wearing in 5 years? What are we going to wear in 5 years? What are going to be the trends? What are going to be the styles 5 years, 10 years from now, and 15 years from now? So what my technique is to try to understand where we might be in 5, 10, 15 years, is I go back that same amount of time. So if we're going to 2030, I'll go back 10 years, you know, whatever, however many years, I'll go back 8 years, 10 years, and I'll look at all the fashion magazines and the styles, and I'll look at, you know, the research, and I'll see how that is different from our current styles right now. And then I use that sort of to inspire me to change it up just a little bit for what we're doing for the future. So that's actually really fun, because but the other thing is, we don't really do anything over the top. Our show creators and our writers and our directors, nobody really wants the costumes to be super duper attention getting most of the time. Most of the time they want the costumes to just be, you know, there to make sure that we all know where we are in time, what era we're in, for the actors to, you know, to suit the storytelling. But we kind of let the costumes we don't go too bold with them, so that we get this chance to tell the story with the actors and their faces and their discussion and their dialogue and all that stuff. So when I'm saying we go back, you know, it's not like I suddenly do like all this kind of crazy trendy stuff when I go back in time either. So it goes both ways. When I go into the future, I don't go crazy and make it look like something that's distracting. And when we go back in time, I do the same thing. I don't make my characters so period looking that it's really distracting to the storytelling. You know, I think that's probably true for all of us, unless a costume really needs to be outstanding or notable. I mean, they always have to be outstanding, but unless they need to be notable and really grab everybody's attention for the costume, I feel like a lot of us sort of just, you know, dial it back a little bit just to make sure that we don't, you know, that we're part of the whole of the filmmaking of that scene.
What will you miss most about making the show now that you're done producing it and it's almost done airing?
Okay, I'm going to start crying again, because we're just tomorrow's my last day. So what I'm going to miss most are the people and the good friends that I've made on the show. It's really on the surface for me right now, because we're just finishing up, and we've all been together for all these years. The actors and a lot of my crew have been with me the whole time. And so for us, it's, and we've all, everyone, all of us, and I speak for the actors too when I say this, none of us really knew what we were getting into. None of us really knew how important these characters and these stories and this experience was going to be for all of us, and in many different ways. And so it's just, that's going to be the hard part, is not seeing the people who have become like my family every day.
Well, congratulations on your work on the show and all the hard work your department has done. You've been recognized with Emmy nominations, so knock on wood for more to come. And it's been a pleasure talking with you about it.
Thank you so much.
In Fulcher, you designed the costumes for a very British scandal about the infamous divorce of the Duke and Duchess of Argyll in the 1960s. Now, since Margaret Campbell, the Duchess, was so well known for her look, was there a lot of pressure to capture like this very fashionable, well-known person?
I wouldn't say there was that. No, not really. I think because when we first started out, and in starting the project and researching who Margaret was, and because I say she was very famous sort of in the 20s and 30s, and then when the divorce happened in the 60s, and then actually after that in the 70s. And so the sort of time frame we're doing with 1947 up to the divorce in the 60s. And so it's not that actually that sort of small area of her time was less documented, and so there's kind of less images of her around. So actually, when I kind of we started creating a character and started creating all the looks, because she has so many different looks in the show, it was finding maybe the items and colors and fabrics that would be synonymous with Margaret. So for instance, there's this amazing photograph of Margaret in the 70s of her wearing this huge tiger kaftan, sat with her poodle in her Mayfair house. And obviously that was a period we weren't doing. So I thought, well, we've got to get that in the show somewhere. So I designed actually it's one of my favorite dresses in the show, the tiger print wrap-round dress. She's so sexy, but it's having those sort of elements of the Margaret that people might know, but then putting them in our show. And then just because she actually, I think Margaret loved her animal skin and animal furs and her textures and those patterns. And so I kind of put more of those into her wardrobe. Like she's always decked out in these ridiculously amazing furs. So it's so decadent and sensual. And so actually I always think as a viewer, if you can feel that, and it's like you want to touch her. And there's something very sexual about that. And I love that. And I know Claire loved having that on her so that she felt more empowered and felt more sexual and sensual. I love it.
And you've talked about how you used a lot of Venetian wool for her character. What was it about that material that you felt was right for her and to build a wardrobe around?
Well, it was, I think, again, because we had a 6-week shoot, and she has 85 changes in 6 weeks, spanning 3 decades, which is just an insane amount to do. And so I tried to really pull it back in terms of her silhouettes. And even though the colors would change to denote the time that she's in, and if she's, let's say at the beginning in the 40s, she's a lot softer, and then it kind of comes stronger and more combative with the sort of strong reds with her and Ian in the 60s. And so I and my team, we decided to kind of pull it back and to keep a fabric as a core fabric for her outfits. So for the continuity, because sometimes I feel like the continuity with so many changes, it can become really jarring in the edits. So it's like bang, 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 constant changes. So actually we tried to pull it back to have a fabric that would flow in all these different changes, and the colors would flow into each other. And also Venetian wool photographs so beautifully. And so with Margaret's silhouette, because it was very form-fitting and all the skirts just caressed her figure, and on camera the lighting would just hit the surface in such a gorgeous way that it just, and also in such a wealthy way, and she was this woman who was incredibly wealthy, and so on camera we wanted to make her this very wealthy, sensuous woman, because a lot of the time when you go, especially English fashion of the period, even if you're very wealthy, you can go a bit too heavy with the walls, and it's like a dense wall, and on camera it's too dense. So again, we tried to sort of maybe contemporize it, I suppose, a bit with that, and just make her more sensual, but still very expensive looking. So that was the main reason for the Venetian wall choice.
And then you've got Paul Bettany as Ian, and a contrasting character in that he's not as, fashion forward in the same way. It's like dressing a character and trying to convey a character who is a little bit more rigid and a little bit less, flamboyant in their style.
I think what was brilliant about Ian and Paul playing Ian is when I was researching the Duke, I was obviously researching from the 30s to the 40s and then with 56s, and actually I started looking at images of him later on in the 70s. I think he died in 74 or something, and I realized that the cuts of his suits never changed in, I don't know, 40 years. And so I thought, again, that's brilliant, because with us having so many changes throughout the episodes, again, it was trying to reduce the continuity. And so it was less jarring with all the changes. So I decided to keep the silhouettes of the three-piece suits, which again, I think so sartorial. And Paul, I mean, we're very lucky with Paul because he's got the most amazing figure, broad-shouldered, tiny waist and long legs. So he wears a suit so well. So that, I mean, everything for him was made as well. So I kept that core silhouette, and we just changed it with the fabrics. But then, say when he was in Biarritz, we then changed it for the colors to match the light, bright tones of the Biarritz when we're shooting there. We're not shooting there, it was in London, but yeah, we were shooting there. So I think it was, and also because he's playing because he had a flamboyance about him, but he was still of an aristocratic type. So there is a certain styling and type of that, but also I'm trying to think, he had a bit more flamboyance to him. So even the way he dressed his pocket squares, and he always had a tie pin, and even the Argyle ducal crest signet ring, which was made from as well. It's everything. It was like a notch up. So there's still an elegance, but it was almost, he was conforming a little bit more, but there was like a little bit more elegance to him as well. And I loved his leather World War I greatcoat that he wears, because we had to duplicate so many of them. They're all fantastically broken down. And again, Paul, he just looked like a fashion model wearing them. And I was so lucky. But every time he'd come to set, and the director would be like, oh God, another Vogue shoot we're doing here, because he'd just wear it. And he's like, wow, I'm very, very lucky.
And as you mentioned, the series spanning several years, multiple decades, was besides how the characters were changing, in terms of the emotions and the tones of what they were going through, was there a lot of change in how you were dressing, like in terms of the style at the time, in terms of trends, from one decade to the next?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with Margaret, her I say actually the most obvious would be the hemlines and the fit of her suit. So we start in the 40s. So everything is all very nipped in the waist, sort of big sleeves, bigger, upper half, and then I get very sort of form-fitting with below the knee or mid-calf skirts. And then as the time went on, the decades went on into 60s, everything became shorter, and all the cuts of the suits became boxier. And actually, we decided in the fittings with Claire that we'd still retain an echo of a waistline in her suiting, so it wasn't bang on straight. Just so it's again a little bit more flashing on camera, and again made it a little bit more sensual. And so the shapes becoming boxier, but we're sort of, I'm sort of adapting it again, because all the way through, because we're doing period, but it's for a modern day audience, so you can be bang on correct. But I always think you've got to know how you can shift it, just so that as a viewer you will understand it, but still empathize and still understand who this character is. But again, with Paul's outfits, I mean, as I said, they didn't really change just because he didn't change. I love that.
Well, congratulations on your work on the show, and the dozens and dozens of costumes, especially for Margaret. It's been a pleasure talking to you about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Laura Montgomery, you're the costume designer for What We Do in the Shadows, FX's comedy about vampires. Since the characters originate from different eras before they became vampires, what's the sense of freedom, like to be able to span so much time in the wardrobes of these immortal beings?
I often say What We Do in the Shadows really is a dream job. And thank you for having me on this panel today, because I'm just so excited to be able to talk about it. And what I love about it is that it's a period show and it's all the periods. So the conceit from the beginning, even because the genesis of the show, it started with a movie. Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement made this beautiful little movie in New Zealand. And the conceit that they started with initially was that, much like humans, the vampires kind of all get stuck in the period in which they were kind of in their heyday, which for them is when they were human. So because they are of varying ages, the concept is that they're stuck in the period when they were human. So for our character of Nandor, that is the 1400s in kind of the region of Persia, formerly Persia, Iran. We have two characters who are like Victorian-esque. Laszlo, who is British, and so we kind of center him in like a mid-Victorian silhouette. Nadia, who is his wife, is actually from a small island in Greece, and she's much older, but we've kind of put her, because they're a married couple and they're always supposed to look like a matched pair, we've put her really firmly in the 1890s so that we can do that amazing mutton leg sleeve, which wasn't around. It was around for like not even 10 years. But we just love doing a big sleeve on her. But then the beauty of it all is that it's also a contemporary show. So we're not trapped in one particular period. So they're rooted in this period, and that's what the base of their costume is. But because they have been alive for hundreds of years, we can add in like, a vintage Lacroix piece on Nadia, or something from the 80s, and they've picked up little bits and bobs along the way. And so we're not trapped in one particular period. It's like influenced by the period, but then we can pull in elements from all the periods, I like to say.
And then you've got Colin, the energy vampire. Is it a unique experience as a costume designer to dress a character who is, like, by definition supposed to be deadly boring?
It's kind of a challenge with him. It is and it isn't. So in the first season of the show, he was established as having a color palette of beige. And I inherited the show from Amanda Neal, who is the costume designer from New Zealand, who had also done the movie. And it was funny, in the office initially, on the mood boards for all the characters, everyone had lots of pictures and references. And Colin's mood board was just a square of beige. So that was the inspiration for him, is that he's in a very neutral, a very boring color palette. But then what really helped us with this year is that we found out how old he is. So in this season, he's celebrating his 100th birthday. So that allowed me to kind of walk back and figure out, okay, so when he was a young man, he would have been a young man in 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so before, it had been a little bit, not all over the map, but we were using suits from the night. We were using suits from all the periods. And so now knowing how old he was, I was able to really look at kind of like early mid-century tailoring. And so I looked at a lot of kind of classic film reference, and the Duke of Windsor was a big influence for the types of patterns that he would wear and the cuts of the suits as well. So we went very like kind of Cary Grant, Duke of Windsor. Those were his two big inspirations. And so I really refined the tailoring for him this season to give him more of a specific point of view.
And since these characters are creatures of the night, of course, like what kind of considerations go into the costumes when considering the lighting and the cinematography and the sets?
Initially, the show is a very dark show. And we've kind of learned now, we just finished shooting our 4th season, which will be released in July. But we've learned over the years, although these are, as you said, creatures of the night, and we want to keep them dark to keep it a bit gothic, and also they hunt at night. So it would be ridiculous for them to be walking around in neon because they wouldn't be inconspicuous. They wouldn't be able to, catch their victims. But I've really tried to find the balance between using darker colors and still being able to see the detail. I think the house, the production design of the mansion does that in a beautiful way of keeping it dark, but there's so much like pattern and texture, and there's just enough brightness to kind of be able to see all the detail. So I tried to lift the palette to more of a mid-tone range, keeping it in the really rich jewel tones. But I find, especially with the way that the show is lit, to keep it moody, details can get lost. So I tried to, push the color a little bit more, make it rich, but try to there's a lot of shine and a lot of texture, metallics, going into the burgundies, the purples, the teals that, to the eye might look really bright. But then as soon as you get it in the mansion, it's like, okay, well, that looks almost black. So great. But you can still read it a little bit. So keeping it dark, but having enough reflection and light and mid-tone colors to get some depth.
Do you have any favorite pop culture vampires throughout the years from a costuming perspective that are so iconic that it's like you see that wardrobe and it's like that's who that is?
Great question. I have a lot of favorites. Lost Boys was a big one. Kiefer Sutherland and his gang of really, sexy and scary vampires. Of course, the vampires in Buffy. But for me, like I often say, it all comes back to Aiko. That Bram Stoker's Dracula, Aiko Ishioka, everything that she did in that movie, I think is perfect. From his like blood rivulated armor and the wedding costume that is a reference to the Klimt portrait. I just think, and then all the period costumes that she does for that movie, it's perfect. And we often, if I can just I use that as my kind of guiding light.
And you mentioned having like references for Colin, like Cary Grant and Duke of Windsor. Do you have similar like specific historical references for like Nadia, Laszlo, and Nandor that you kind of circle back to?
For Nandor, I tried to bring his silhouettes and to get more Eastern inspiration, I would say, for him, and really home in on the place where he was from. And so for that, the source reference at that point is all painting and portraiture. There are some illustrated poems. And so it was a lot of looking at paintings, going to museums. There were shawls from the period. It's mostly just like royalty and shawls, which he was at the time. So a lot of portraiture. For Laszlo, he's such a rock, like, it's funny because as you get to know the actors and you're developing the characters, and now that we have 4 seasons of the show under our belts, it's inevitable that the actors' personalities kind of sneak in there as well. So Matt Berry, he is a bona fide rock star. And so it's hard to avoid getting a bit of that rock and roll influence for him. So even though, he's our Victorian guy, but there's a lot of Nick Cave in there with him. There's a lot of Bowie. That's kind of, we're moving in that direction. I think he's just so cool. And then for Nadia, there isn't a lot of, again, her influences are a little bit more modern. So it's modern fashion, and then it's that kind of like big blown out 80s Mcgraw. Natasha likes to reference, if it's something that one of her Greek aunts would have worn in the 80s, she's like, yes, this is perfect. This is the right note.
Well, congratulations on your work on the show, and looking forward to season 4 when that drops. So thank you so much for talking to me about it.
Thank you.
I'm Gold Derby editor Daniel Montgomery, here to discuss the art of TV costume design with Janie Bryant from 1883, Michelle Cole from Blackish, Kameron Lennox from Pam and Tommy, Hala Bahmet from This Is Us, Ian Fulcher from A Very British Scandal, and Laura Montgomery from What We Do in the Shadows. Now, Hollywood film and TV production were thrown into chaos in the last couple of years because of COVID, of course. I'm wondering, now that we're 2 years in, are you settling into the new normal as it pertains to the on-set experience, or has new normal not even gotten here yet? How about you, Laura?
Great question. I think I've done a couple of shows during the pandemic, and that was, it was a big learning curve, especially at the beginning. We didn't know how the disease was transmitted. So I remember, quarantining, shopping for 2 days and being in a full hazmat suit with a mask and a face shield. And now that has relaxed somewhat. I've learned that I don't want to do Zoom fittings anymore if there's nobody from costumes present. I will never again send a rack of clothes to an actor's hotel room and leave them unattended with it. That can go, I've learned the hard way, that can go sideways. But being in Toronto, we have a lot of cast from out of town. So when we were having to have people quarantine for travel, there was, a 2-week period when we were all kind of sitting on our thumbs wanting to get to work. I think what has really helped is that people have gotten a lot better with technology. So even though, I don't want to do a FaceTime fitting when people are totally hands off, I recently got COVID myself. So I had to work remotely, but it did work to be FaceTiming with people in the office. And, I was able to virtually do my job, which is something that I think had I not had the 2 years of COVID training of working remotely and being virtual and really using FaceTime, it wouldn't have been such an easy transition. And now it's like, okay, we can do this over Zoom. We can do this using our modern technologies.
Kameron, how about you?
Yeah, just recently, Lily James had posted a bunch of fitting photos on her Instagram social media account. And I found it really funny because there's her in her wig and her costume and all these things. And then in the background was me in full hazmat, and you couldn't see my face. And I zoomed in on it and sent the photo to her. And I said, is this how you remember me? I mean, is this your visual idea of what I look like? And she said, yes. And that's the truth with both the shows that I did through the pandemic, is I realized I have such a close relationship, as we all do, with our actors. But if I were to walk down a street, they would never recognize me. It was a realization for me seeing her post. But I am grateful that things have lightened up a little bit. It makes our job a little bit easier. It's really hard, especially for people that wear glasses, to wear the mask and the shield and all that stuff, because it just gets so foggy and it's so hard to focus. I concur with learning the ways to do things virtually has been a huge learning process for me as well. And I am grateful for it, that I'm able to actually do even this, that we're all able to come together on location and be able to do this. So, but yeah, it's been an interesting ride.
It's almost like letting go a little bit. I found I've had to let go, like you were saying, 'cause my first fitting actually on British Scandal with Claire, was I didn't have COVID, but my main assistant had COVID. So I had to isolate. And it was so stressful, but it was just having to let go and be like, okay, it is what it is. Let's just embrace it. And I think, 'cause I'm quite controlling, hands up. And I said that for me was like, okay, that's a massive learning curve. And actually on the job I'm on now, it's been on for a year. I think I've been isolation 3 times. And on one of them, the main lead actress, it was all her establishing of all her outfits. And it was like, oh no. But again, it was let go, Ian. And I think I've learned, and that's the one thing I'd say is I've just chilled out a bit, I think. But
Michelle?
I agree with everyone here. It has been a learning curve, and you do give up. You learn to breathe, and you do kind of give up what you have no control over. It's trying to be safe on the weekends. That's a big deal for me. I have nieces and nephews that I adore and I want to see, but I walk my dogs more. I'm around them more. I can do takeout still. So your life changes. You have to adjust. But I think we all are pros here. So, and we love our jobs. So I think we'll do anything to make sure everybody's safe.
Janie?
Gosh, you know what? It was so interesting. I went back to work in August of 2020, and it was before film and television had come back. And a director that I've worked with forever in commercials, he was doing a commercial in August of 2020. And we were really scared at first going back. And I had a full-on face mask with a shield, with a face mask. And, I was so paranoid, and we were all paranoid. And we were also wearing, the hospital gowns. And I think it was 100 degrees plus. We were out in Palmdale. We were all just like dripping. I should say glistening. Yeah, it was so hot and it was crazy. And then, we've all kind of just adapted our new safety measures, which has been really good because, just with wearing masks, nobody's gotten the flu. We haven't gotten a cold. I feel like it's been a journey for all of us. And we've all learned so much from each other during this whole thing. It's been really interesting. So many, many blessings, many lessons.
Hala?
Yes, I'm not sure if I can add much more. I've had a similar experience to my colleagues here as they've discussed it, with the exception of Janie's Texas experience. That must have been crazy. I just read recently that we did something like 54,000 COVID tests this year on my show. And so that gives you an example of how serious my studio and network are about COVID safety. And we did start out, as everyone mentioned, we started out in our fittings with masks and shields and lab coats and gloves and all of that. And then we sort of were able to peel that back. We would put a complete fresh set of PPE on for each fitting. Of course, our building was also retrofitted and our stages were all retrofitted. While we were on hiatus, they were retrofitted for better ventilation systems. And so that was a good thing that they did. We are based at Paramount. So that was nice. It gave me a feeling of more safety for my crew. But I feel like we all probably do that. Our responsibility as department leaders and leading large teams of crew and working so closely with the actors, I felt really an extra incentive to be much more careful in my private life, my personal life. And I feel like the first time I went out to a restaurant, like in 2 years, was just a few months ago. I mean, I've really taken it very seriously so that I can protect other people on the crew. But it has eased up. What I did find, for people who are more recently required to wear masks, I found it odd for the complaining and the fighting against wearing a mask. That to me was so strange, because I don't know about for you guys, but it only took me only a couple of weeks of wearing. At first, of course, it was uncomfortable, but then after a few weeks of wearing one, now I almost feel naked without one. It became very, very normal for me to wear a mask. And it didn't feel that it was a discomfort to me at all. And so now I'm going the other direction where I'm starting to go outside without one. And I have to, it's like an adjustment period again to be outside without a mask. But we were very fortunate. Our studio and everybody were very, you know, they were really on it really early, because we were one of the first big TV shows to go back during COVID. And we weren't the first, but we were in that group of guinea pigs of shows to see how you know, what's going to happen, and are we able to go back to normal production? Is this going to be something, or is it going to be just changed forever? So I felt like that gave us also a great responsibility to as trailblazers, to make sure that we did it correctly and that we could keep our industry and our work going safely. And we did. We really, my show really, it's really quite astonishing how well they handled it and how few cases we really had over the course of the last 2 years. It's really something. So yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know where we're gonna, I don't know what it's gonna be like going forward. I don't know if the rules will be relaxed more with other major networks and studios, but I feel like we might be wearing masks that might be something that stays with us for a while.
And you know, one last question. I'm wondering, as costume designers, is there a sort of universe or setting that, you know, if you haven't had a chance to design for, that you really, really, you know, love to design for? Michelle?
I knew you were going to start with me. Darn. My background is, believe it or not, I'm not a funny person, so I don't know how I got into comedy. And but my background is in theater, and so I love doing period, the 1800s. So that's what I studied when I went to college in Kentucky. So that's what I studied, and I have never done any of it. So that's what I would love to close out my career. I'm 65 right now, and I always say if I have one show left that I really want to do, or one play left, I would love to do a period piece.
How about you, Janie?
I love period design. It is truly my passion, and my favorite period for forever has been the 1770s. I love French Rococo, and Baroque period. So that is my dream job. I mean, the men are just as fancy as the women, and I love the wigs and the decorations, and I love brocades and big dresses. So yes, French Baroque and Rococo.
Hala?
For me too, as well. I love period. And I think my least favorite era is Civil War era. I think I'm really not into early 1800s all the way up to like the bustle period. For me, is not that interesting. And I also really am not a fan of Elizabethan for some reason. But what I would love to do is anything from the 1880s through the 1970s. That's that whole span of almost 100 years. I love all of those eras. I love all of them for all their different reasons. I like all the different silhouettes. I like, you know, how the clothing reflected the changing times for each of those decades and what was going on. I'm sort of a history buff too myself, and so I like the research, and I like to know what was going on culturally, so that and how that influenced the costumes. So yeah, but I think if I had to pick, yeah, anywhere from 1880s to 1970s. I'm really not interested in doing, I shouldn't say this, but I really wouldn't, I feel like I've done so much 80s and 90s already. I feel like I want to give that a rest.
Ian?
I would say anything between 1890s and 1910, just because I'm obsessed with the silhouettes from those periods. And I think it'd be really interesting just to a really stylized, fashionable version of like a really contemporary version of maybe, 1890s. I'm going to throw it out there. Those huge sleeves and all those satins and all those fabrics and all the lace and all those hairstyles. It'd just be amazing. You know, it'd just be so full on. It'd be fun, actually. Yeah. I'm putting it out there.
Kameron?
Yeah, no, I for me, I think it would be 1920s to 1970s. I did just spend the last 2 years in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, and I'm ready to move on as well. But there is something about, especially 1920s and 1930s, that really fascinates me. And I actually, in every job that I do, there is some sort of Easter egg, some sort of something in there from those periods, because I'm just obsessed and get weak at the knees at some of the stuff for physical. There is a 1920s silk robe that Rose Byrne wears in her kitchen. And then in Pam and Tommy, Tommy wears this 1930s black kimono with these gold fighting dragons. And it's just, I always try to like put something in my shows that really makes it true to me of who I am. And it's definitely from those eras that I try to put in them. But yeah, so I'd say early 1920s to 1970s. I'm wide open. I love period. I love researching it. I love the history behind why we wear certain things. And I love that when you're in a certain period, anything that came before it will somehow have its place in the show. And it's just figuring out how everything is inspired by something that happened before. But thanks.
And Laura?
I mean, I do echo a lot of what my colleagues have said. I've been so spoiled to work in period, the 1890s. I mean, we love doing period. I love doing period. And the research is there as well. And then you can put your own spin on it. I think if it's a good kind of futuristic project that's not too, the uniform stuff, in my opinion, can be quite boring. But if it's very like free and unfettered, and it has a really interesting point of view, like a Dune, where you can, be making these really interesting shapes and working with new fabrics and just creating textures and silhouettes, and really just world building, like making your own world that is influenced by certain things, but it can be influenced by the shape of a vase or, a sand dune, something that you see. That's really interesting. The other 90s that I personally really resonate with is the 1990s. I had a costume designer once who said that she thinks that the time when you're paying the most attention, like when you're a teenager and in your early, as a young adult, that's when people tend to pay the most attention to clothing, and that's when they're kind of finding themselves. I mean, I know as costume designers, we're always paying attention to clothing, but I think that's when you're like really dialed into like choosing who you're going to be. And for me, that was the 90s. So I just always have a soft spot for the 90s. And then as a personal project, if I could like make my own project, I'm Japanese Canadian. So I think costume wise, it would be very interesting. My grandparents were born in Canada, actually, and then they were interned during the Second World War. So if there was an epic, and, Snow Falling on Cedars has been made, but starting from great grandparents in Japan to immigrating to Canada to losing everything during the war and then to having to rebuild would be a very interesting project, both personally and for costume.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being with us today and for talking about all of your very unique, wide-ranging work and sharing your knowledge of the craft with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.